Welcome to Tea Time History Chat Live. Why is Henry VIII buried with Jane Seymour? Let's do that today. It's the logical look at why that would be the case. That's the way my mind works. So come along on that journey with me. I also want to introduce you to an interesting figure of the Elizabethan and Stuart court, Francis Bacon. Just slightly. We're not going to do a full-on biography of him, but he's interesting. So I thought you might like to hear a bit about him, and we're also going to be doing some other stuff. So pop in the chat, say hi. Where are you coming from? I don't know. Has anything caught your eye history-wise this week that you want to talk about? Remind me again, I can't do live subtitles on Instagram. I apologize. That's not a function that is there. I am streaming live on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. So hopefully you're all hearing me fine and you're here to join in. Hi, I can see lots of people joining. Hello over there in India. Hi, Trav. I can see you over there in the US, and David in Chicago. Lizzie, hi. If you want to support me, obviously on Instagram, you can do badges. On YouTube, you can do super chats, Facebook stars. So Maria, hi in Iowa. How are you doing? Trav's over in Washington. So yeah, let's get on to this. So obviously, if you're listening or watching on the playback, hi, thank you for catching up with it. So this is also going to be on the podcast as well. And if you need details of all the other places that I am, depending on where you are and you want to find all those places, then if you go to my bio, get hold of my Substack, then you'll find everything. Oh, and Angie's not far from me in Badsey in the Cotswolds. Concept is over in the Canary Islands. Nice. Is it nice this time of year? I've no idea. It's freezing here. We had freezing fog this morning. How delightful. How delightful. So right, for those of you just joining today, I thought we'd just have a little chat through why Henry VIII is buried with Jane Seymour, because the story that we always get is, well, he loved her the most. So I want to just have a little bit of a logical look at that, at why he's buried with Jane Seymour. Thought it'd just be an interesting one. Today is the anniversary, though. Before I go on, I must mention this, of course, of the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. And she was executed. Oh, thank you, Trav, for the badge. Thank you so much. She was executed at Fotheringhay Castle in Northamptonshire, which no longer exists after the Civil War. It was left in a dilapidated state, and what would happen? It wouldn't happen today, but I mean, we're not recyclers, but everyone else in the past was. We're not very good at it. We make a thing about it, whereas they just did it, and including using stone and brick and whatever from old buildings, including castles. No one was proud. Hi, Colleen. How are you doing? And Fotheringhay Castle, sort of was pilfered, and that. So there's very little left of it. But this is where Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed on this day in 1587. So it's Maria, do you think Mary was guilty or just a queen in the wrong place at the wrong time? Well, that's interesting. I actually have a video on YouTube about the execution of Mary, and any of you on Instagram, actually, I've just shared it as a reel. I've got a little I was talking to Gareth Russell about Mary, Queen of Scots, and how she sort of how she ended up where she was. We've got a tour in September, the Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots tour, where we'll be going into obviously the story of these two women in quite a lot of detail. And we're actually going to be visiting Peterborough Abbey, Peterborough Cathedral, sorry, excuse me, where Mary, Queen of Scots was actually buried initially. And I say initially, she was executed in February. She wasn't interred until the July. And she, of course, was moved eventually, because she's now in Westminster Abbey, which is another stop on our tour in September. So you can still visit, though. It's kept as maybe not as was, but it looks very similar to Catherine of Aragon's tomb, which she is still there. And it's still there in Peterborough, so you can go and see it. So we're going to see that, and we're going to see her final resting place in Westminster Abbey. Yes, Colleen, we get to meet Mary. Colleen is going to be coming with me in September on this tour. So yeah, we get to see where Mary was originally interred. Like I say, months after she was executed. So she was executed in February. She was interred in Peterborough in a Protestant ceremony. Mary, of course, died a Catholic martyr. You know, in her own mind, at minimum, when she took off her overgown, her kirtle was crimson red, you know, the sign of a martyr. And yeah, so she's interred there in a Protestant ceremony. You know, not what she would have wanted at all. Interestingly, also, Catherine of Aragon, just as an aside, because she is interred in Peterborough as well, she also didn't get the funeral that she wanted. She was buried as the Dowager Princess of Wales in recognition of her first marriage, her marriage to Arthur Tudor, Henry VIII's eldest or elder brother. So interesting that both of the ladies who were interred there did not have a funeral that would have gone along with their wishes. Mary, in fact, requested to be buried in France, either next to her first husband, Francis, or her mother, Mary of Guise. But obviously that wasn't going to be the case. And in her final resting place in Westminster Abbey, the tomb that was created for her by her son, James I of England, James VI of Scotland. Don't get too sentimental. He didn't do much for her when she was alive, but he did spend twice as much on her tomb as he did on the tomb of Elizabeth I, which they're not very far away from each other. They're both in the Henry VII chapel, or the Lady Chapel, and in sort of different side chapels. So we'll be going to both of those places, Peterborough and Westminster Abbey, as part of the tour to look into the story of Elizabeth and Mary, Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots. But in a short answer-ish, Maria, to your question, was Mary guilty or was she a queen? Can I give a short answer to this, actually? Can I give a short answer to this? Let's see. Let's have a go. She was definitely getting involved in plots by the end, yes, but she had been incarcerated in England for over 20 years. One of her prisons, in inverted commas, is a castle, is Tutbury Castle, and we're going there on the tour as well because it's incredibly significant. She was there 4 times, and it is thought that perhaps it was while she was at Tutbury that she gets involved in the Babington plot, and you have the casket letters written in cipher, but by Mary, to conspirators who effectively were going to overthrow Elizabeth, murder Elizabeth, and put Mary on the throne. But by this point, what else is she going to do? She has nothing. Her situation is just getting worse and worse and worse. There is no way out. So I'm not sure I would be any better in that situation. I may well have plotted a lot earlier on. I don't know. Who knows? But so I think, yes, she was guilty, whether, but with a lot of extenuating circumstances. That was a long time to be incarcerated. She was incredibly ill as well. So, excuse me, just have a sip of my tea. I hope you all have a suitable drink. Trav says, I can see why she became involved. I think it's understandable to want freedom after being a prisoner for so long. A prisoner for so long, and yeah, like no way out. I could say quite flippantly, her son wasn't trying to get her out either. So yeah, what's a girl to do? What's a girl to do? But plot, maybe. So it's an incredibly interesting story, one that I think we're all very drawn to. Now, before I go on, I just want to give my new patron a shout out. Chris has joined Patreon this week. So any of you who are interested, we've got, well, actually, there's a few reasons at the moment to get involved. So we've just started book club. We're reading Gareth Russell's book about the Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic and the end of the Edwardian era. Our book club meeting is on the 19th of March. So even if you're not joined at the moment, you've got time to join and come to the meeting, and then we'll start on our next book anyway, so you'll have a chance to do that. So it's not a barrier to joining. Plus I'll tell you now, why don't we do this now? So I've been talking about the tours that we've got on, or one of the tours that we've got on this year in September, but one of my most popular tours is the Anne Boleyn tour in May. Every May we do the Anne Boleyn tour, and it includes we'll stay at Hever for the entire time. We have speakers. I have literally this morning just been chatting to Tracy Borman, who has confirmed she will be on that tour, speaking to the group. We get a tour of Hidden Hever after the crowds have gone home. I mean, we have the place, honestly, we stay there. So after everyone's gone home at night, if you want to go for a walk around the grounds, or first thing in the morning, I love getting up really early in the morning and going for a walk around the grounds. It is just delightful. And in May, I mean, touch wood, we've had wonderful weather every year, and it's just idyllic. It's so beautiful and atmospheric and just wonderful. And you're in Anne's childhood home, you know. But we also go to Hampton Court Palace and the Tower of London. We go to the Tower of London on the anniversary of Anne's execution, so the 19th of May. And actually, there's lots of other people you'd know from the Tudor world who are at the Tower of London for the exact, you know, for that reason, well, not for that reason, they're not on tour with me, but for to pay their respects to Anne on that day. Gareth Russell will be with us, as I'm just so lucky to have him with me. He's so brilliant. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is that tour is about to go on sale. It sells out really quickly. If you're a member of my Patreon at patreon.com/British history, you get 7 days to book before it goes on general release. So if you want to join, it's £5 a month. That's a big perk of being involved. We get book club, you get a blog each month, and yes, everyone who's in Patreon, I know I didn't do January's, you're owed one for January. And also historian interviews. You get the long extended ad-free versions, plus you get to ask. I always come to you before I do the interviews and ask you if you've got any questions you want to ask whoever I'm interviewing. So there's loads of stuff in there, but so the tour, so the Anne Boleyn May 2024 tour will go on sale to patrons next Wednesday. So what date's that, everybody? Is that the 15th? And then the following Wednesday it'll go on general release. So if you're absolutely desperate to be on that tour, I would suggest becoming a patron, but obviously I would, because I think it's fun. And we're having a lot of fun in there. Now, shall we get on to what I've promised you I'll actually talk about today? So we've done Mary anyway. We needed to do Mary, Queen of Scots, it being the anniversary of her execution. We needed to do that. But I did promise you today, as well as the announcement, which I've just done also, that we would talk about why Henry is buried with Jane Seymour. And I did a video on this in 2018. 2018, I did lives. I did one live. I really wish I'd carried on. Anyway, I've been doing it for a couple of years since. So the topic I chose was to talk about why Henry VIII is buried where he's buried. And it was because, you know, I think with Henry VIII, he's such a big character. He's so well known in history. He's notorious. And yet you can go and see the tomb of his daughter Elizabeth. You can go and see the tombs of his parents, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. You can go and see the tomb of his brother Arthur. You can go and see the tomb of his, would it be niece, Mary, Queen of Scots? But where is Henry? Well, of course, Henry doesn't have a tomb. I've spoken about this before. He's in St George's Chapel, Windsor, which has been on the TV lots, where Meghan and Harry were married, where the Queen has just been buried. And he was in the one of the sort of vaults underneath the choir, and only marked as a grave during the reign of William IV, with this marble slab. It 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 lists the people in the vault in order that they went in there, so no priority order. So Jane actually comes above Henry. Lisa makes a great point. Would Henry have been famous if he hadn't married 6 times? And this has come up, I think, in some of the History After Dark discussions that we've had. I don't think he would be. If you think about what else Henry did, everything he's famous for, he's basically famous and he sticks in the mind because he was married 6 times. I really do think that. And the actions that he then is remembered for come out of those marriages, or the requirement for them, or his thoughts around what he needed to do in order to have them, break them, whatever, legitimize them. So no, I don't think I think actually Henry, if he hadn't have if he'd have just stayed married to Catherine, if she'd have had a boy, or even if Henry had accepted that Mary was his heir, I think Henry would have, I think he would have paled into insignificance. However, he didn't, and he hasn't. And in his lifetime, he was so in control and careful of his image that it stands to reason that he will be turning in his only very latterly marked grave at the thought that he never got his tomb. It was designed. We have the account of what it should have looked like. So yeah. So yeah, sorry, I'm trying to read the comments and talk at the same time. So he so he's in this right, and the tomb that he had designed for himself, it would have been effigies of himself and Jane Seymour. Really grand, with cherubs throwing down rose petals, cascading red and white roses. Just, it would have been incredibly elaborate, as I suppose we would expect Henry to have wanted. Now, of course, we've spoken many times before, his sarcophagus that was so the center, I suppose, of it, I don't know how it would have fit in actually, but the sarcophagus that was going to be used was confiscated from Cardinal Wolsey. It now has Nelson in it in the crypt of St Paul's Cathedral underneath the dome. And the Wolsey angels are in the British Library, not the British Library, excuse me, the Victorian Albert Museum, and I don't know where that came from. And they would have also been incorporated into this tomb that was never built. But that wasn't what I was going to talk to you about, was it? It was, why is he with Jane? And the story we hear often, but then again, I don't know who says this. I don't know, like, I can't think of serious historians who are going to say this, is that he loved Jane the most. And I don't know, put a thumbs up if that's the story you've heard, or if that's, is that what you think? Do you think he's buried with her because he loved her the most? You could probably tell about the way my voice is slowing down that I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical, but I'm going to also take a drink. Because we're so we're given this narrative. Now, of course, Jane is the only wife of the 6 to give him a son. I also think that's a really short-handed way of explaining why he was married 6 times, because I don't think he was actually trying to get a son by the time he was married to Catherine Parr. I know it's the final son, final wife. But let's go through it. So we've already mentioned Catherine, actually, haven't we? We've mentioned Catherine of Aragon. Kate says she thinks it's purely because she gave him a boy. Lisa, I don't think he loved her the most. It was just the more practical. Yeah, so let's go through it. So yeah, we've mentioned Catherine of Aragon already when we were discussing her final resting place at Peterborough Cathedral, which is also was the initial resting place of Mary Queen of Scots. So we're going there in September. And Catherine got a funeral that she would not have appreciated. She was buried as the Dowager Princess of Wales in light of her marriage to Arthur Tudor, Henry VIII's eldest brother, because Henry had annulled their marriage. He had claimed that their marriage had never been a marriage. It had never been legitimate. It never pleased God, and therefore it just wasn't. And God had shown his displeasure in not giving them sons. And so he couldn't have been buried with Catherine of Aragon because, as far as he was concerned, she was the wife of his brother, not him. So there's Catherine of Aragon gone as a candidate. Anne Boleyn came next. Well, their marriage was annulled, and she was, of course, on she's accused and found guilty on trumped-up charges of treason, of imagining the king's death, effectively, and of committing adultery, although that wasn't technically treasonous. Imagining the king's death was, which, by the way, Henry didn't bring in. That had been in the treason laws right from back to the 1351 Act. I always thought he'd added it. He didn't add it. What else have I got? Vagina. No, he definitely wouldn't like to be buried with the ones he divorced or beheaded. Indeed. Let's have a look what else we've got here. Lisa, if Henry didn't recognise his marriage of Catherine Aragon, I wonder why he spent so much time trying to divorce her. Well, he was trying to annul the marriage. That is what he was trying to do. We simplify it to divorce, but technically it wasn't. It was an annulment. Jenna, I think the reason he chose to be buried with her was because she gave birth to Edward, but also because Henry went into deep depression after her death, and he didn't have time enough to tire of her. Well, that's a very interesting point. She also kept her mouth shut. I really wonder. Sorry, let me finish Anne, and then we'll get on to Jane. Actually, we'll go on to Jane at the end, probably. But yeah, so when he So of course he can't be married with Anne. Anne has been beheaded and buried under the floor of St. Peter ad Vincula, and as a traitor, as imagining his death. This is bad. I mean, he literally he gets betrothed to Jane Seymour the day after Anne is executed. He sends word to Jane on the morning of Anne's execution that he will be sending word to her later on. It's like Jane is not, I don't think, a particularly innocent party in all that, or certainly not a benign party in this. And so we'll come back to Jane. We'll conclude with Jane, because then of course you've got Anne of Cleves, his fourth wife. She's still alive when he dies, and their marriage was annulled as well at 6 months. Remained very close friends. Natalie, do you think he sent word to Jane to humiliate Anne? I don't know that he would have known that it would be public. I don't think he would have known that it would have been public, or that she would ever have known about it. Right, then you have Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard, of course, is also beheaded for committing adultery against the king. They managed to make up laws and stuff as well to get other people executed at the same time. So she is also buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. And then of course you have Catherine Parr at the end. Well, she also outlives him. She's still alive when he dies. So logically it has to be Jane. It has to be Jane. Like people said in the comments, she gave him a son. And there is a large element of remembering Henry is still only the second Tudor monarch. This, relative to, if you think the Plantagenets that came before them that had 400 years on the throne, this is a fledgling dynasty still. Yeah, you probably can't even call it a dynasty, can you? If there's only been two, I don't know. Um, so if sorry, Jenna's just saying um, Henry travelled by barge to see Jane. Mm. Yeah, I can't remember where Jane was and where he was, so I'm not sure the route. Obviously, it would have been on the Thames though, so yeah. Um, so there's a big element of right. I have been your rightful king. Remember the Tudors and who else? I mean, everyone still today knows the power of imagery, and so a tomb which shows, you know, the cherubs and you're gonna have masses said here every day, multiple times a day. You know, this is the rightful king. So of course, their son should be, even though he's only 9 years old, the undisputed heir. He's it. He's it. There is no question. You know, and this is all part of this image making, this propaganda to say, you know, we're done. This is it. It's sorted. This is the succession. It doesn't matter that he's only 9 years old. He's Henry VIII's son. His marriage to Jane Seymour was completely and utterly legitimate, etc., etc. So there you go. But I do think he'd be really annoyed that he's still in the in the vault underneath the choir at St George's Chapel, Windsor. Hi, Monica. How are you? Watching on Facebook. So, yeah. So, I sorry, I think I missed a few questions there. If you asked me a question and I haven't answered it, please feel free to pop it in again. Let me see if I can find where it was. Hi, Maria. How are you doing? Do I think Catherine lied about his her relationship with Arthur? Sorry, Jenna, I believe Jane was staying at Nicholas Carewe's house. So I did a 4-part documentary, which is on YouTube, which I will post links to as we come to the various times. It's basically a chronological cover of the downfall of Anne, because it happens so fast. It happens so fast. And actually in at the end of June into July, Gareth and I are doing a tour called The Private Life of Anne Boleyn, and he's doing 3 talks for that. And the final of those talks, because we're using the summer progress of 1535 as the backdrop to looking into, you know, what was Anne like as a woman, as well as a queen. And his final talk, Gareth's final talk, is about what happened basically, like what was the build up, what was the setup, how was this, how when she's looking at her happiest and her most stable and control, you know, in her position in 1535, by the next May, middle of the next May, she's gone. You know, so Gareth's talk will look at that. His first one is looking at her heritage, and really interesting because the Irish background, I think it definitely cover that, is really fascinating and little talked about. So Gareth is probably the best placed person to talk about that. And then in the middle, we're going to talk about the good years, the sort of 1533 to 1535. Sorry, him in his talk. So we've still got some spaces on that tour. So if you're interested in that one, you can find all the details for that if you follow the link in my bio, or go to britishhistorytours.com. So, and like I say, if you're interested in the Anne Boleyn tour, which is the one I do every May, that is going to be released to members of my Patreon, patreon.com/British History, next Wednesday, and it will go on general release the Wednesday after. So there you go. There you go. How are you doing, everyone? We're half an hour in, and I wanted to mention to you today about someone I don't, I'm trying to, I thought maybe each week I'll do with cover somebody with you who's just of interest. Maybe I'll do it every week, maybe I'll do it every few weeks. I haven't decided yet. But I wanted to talk about someone called Francis Bacon today, because that's a name that I thought, well, I know that name. I know that name. Now, I know him, actually, it turns out, from various different stories that I hadn't piece together is the same person. So you may have heard of his father, Sir Nicholas Bacon, because he was Lord Privy Seal, I think it was. Sorry, Lord Keeper of the Great Seal for Elizabeth I. And he was married twice, and from his second marriage to an incredible lady called Anne Cook, I think her maiden name was. So his second marriage to her, they had two sons, and Francis Bacon was the youngest of those two sons. So the youngest of, I think, 7 children, and the youngest of the brothers by Nicholas Bacon's second wife. And he is kind of, I don't know if he's, I don't know how many people refer to him. He's kind of like the father of like I'm going to say the scientific method because that's what it's called, but this approach to science that says keep trying to prove it wrong. This is my layman's terms, but he's the one. And he's incredibly religious as well. His mother was a Puritan, and even though she was a Puritan, but they're very much actually against the Catholicism. Although his mother, on the death of Edward VI, Anne Bacon rode to Kenninghall, where Mary I was, to pledge allegiance. I think this lady might be savvy. Yes, she was also incredibly well educated. Her father was the tutor to Edward VI, and he was a humanist scholar. He believed that all his children should get a high level of education, I've missed comments, whether they were boys or girls. And Anne Cook, so Francis Bacon's mother, spoke, was it 5 or 6 different languages? And that led into some of her later work. She became a translator of works. She was also a lady in waiting to Mary. To Elizabeth I. So she's an interesting character. So I was looking into Francis Bacon, but his mother is incredibly interesting. So you got Francis Bacon. His dad's Nicholas Bacon. His father's Nicholas Bacon, Keeper of the Great Seal for Elizabeth I. His mother is a lady in waiting to Elizabeth I, and his uncle is Lord Burleigh, William Cecil. So he's very well connected. Now he's educated at home to begin with, which isn't unusual, but for some reason in the write-ups about him, it's made out to be unusual. Thought to be maybe because he was an ill child, but I'm not quite sure where that comes from, because plenty of upper class boys were educated at home. But at 12 he goes to Cambridge, which again isn't unusual. Children were not children for very long in this period. We're sending them off now at 18 to university. They were going off at much earlier, at 12 or so. So he was at 12, and he was there alongside his older brother Anthony Bacon, and had personal tutorage from a man called Dr. John Whitgift, who was later Archbishop of Canterbury. And it's through being at Cambridge that he first meets Elizabeth I. He's still only very young, and she notices him because Queen Elizabeth liked to give people nicknames, and she called him the young Lord Keeper, which is very cute. But his career is quite fascinating in that it wasn't very quick in terms of getting anywhere fast. He isn't sort of like an overnight success story. He was noticed by Elizabeth, and then he became this and this and this and this. He seems to have had to do a lot of sort of groundwork. He ends up at after Cambridge at Gray's Inn, which is the sort of law houses in London, and he has to take up a residency there to start to support himself. And he becomes a member of Parliament. So he's a member of Parliament, and he's let me just, as an aside, so we think of our members of parliament, our MPs now, they live in their constituencies and they represent their constituencies. Just out of interest, let me let me list to you the number of places that he represented. So he begins representing Bosney in Cornwall, then Melcombe in Dorset, then Taunton in Somerset. Later on, he's the MP for Liverpool, then Middlesex. He sits 3 times as the MP for Ipswich and once for Cambridge University, who clearly had their own MP at that point. Which I just find hilarious. But he's got a link to Mary Queen of Scots. So this is another reason why I wanted to mention him today, because he stood up in Parliament and pressed for Mary Queen of Scots' execution, which, if you're with me the whole show, you know happened today in 1587. He also advocated early on, because he's only young when Elizabeth first sees him. He outlives Elizabeth, and he actually rises in terms of into so he first becomes a Sir, and eventually he becomes a Viscount. That's all under James I. James I really favoured him. And he did advocate. He's one of the early advocates for the union of England and Scotland. He also advocated a little later on for the integration of Ireland into that, because he saw that as a way to be closer, the countries to work closer together and to bring about peace effectively. So obviously that didn't actually happen for a lot later, but during the latter part of Elizabeth I's reign, he was on his way up, but through his alliance with Robert Devereux, second Earl of Essex. Now, Robert Devereux was the son of Lettice Knowles, the sort of final wife of Robert Dudley. So he was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester's stepson. And I think when Robert Dudley died, I don't know whether Elizabeth sort of still felt like there was a connection there or something through his stepson, but he became her favourite, and estimated himself, underestimated Elizabeth. Won't go into Essex now because that's not who we're talking about, but effectively Bacon's alliance with Devereux, with the second Earl of Essex, initially paid dividends, and then of course he had to remove himself from those associations because the Earl of Essex actually ends up raising a very ill thought out rebellion. He marches on London to demand an audience with the Queen, at which point he's arrested and charged with treason. And Bacon, as already being someone who's worked as a lawyer, is part of the legal team who looks into the charges against Essex, and he actually writes the official government account of the trial, for which Essex is found guilty, and he's executed in the Tower. When James I comes to the throne, he's impressed by Francis Bacon really quickly, and that's when he actually becomes Sir Francis Bacon. He's not knighted during Elizabeth's reign; he's knighted in 1603, so early on into James's reign, and he doesn't get married until 1607, by which point he's 45 years old, and he marries a girl called Alice Barnum. And when I say girl, I mean girl. I think she was 13 or 14 or 15. She's somewhere around there. And he writes a couple of sonnets. Now, when he was a member of Gray's Inn, back when he was in his late teens, they'd written a play. Now, later on in when he comes to get married, he's writing sonnets to his new bride, which basically say, it doesn't kind of matter that I'm older than you. It's sort of love is love, and I don't know, something like that. I think it was supposed to be reassuring for her. They didn't really ever get on. I don't think. She ends up with they never have any children, and she ends up having an affair, and he writes her out of his will. But anyway, So there is a theory that my good friend Dr. Kat, who is a Shakespeare scholar and has Reading the Past channel on YouTube. We do History After Dark together along with Catherine Brooks. Kat's told me to steer clear of this next bit, which is that people have put Francis Bacon forward as a possible candidate for writing some of Shakespeare's works. So I'm going to say on the matter, apparently not getting involved, not my circus, not my monkeys. But yeah, so apparently. But anyway, he clearly wrote some works, because it doesn't mean that only Shakespeare could write, and therefore it doesn't mean that everything that was written means that someone else was Shakespeare. So there you go. So yeah, so he rises up anyway in the during the reign of James I. He'd had the position of the clerkship of the Star Chamber, which was the court which sat within Westminster Palace, from the end of Elizabeth's reign through to yeah, clean, not my monkey, to much later, where he took up the position, but it was kind of a position in promise, so he was getting the salary of it. Francis was dogged by debt for most of his adult life. His father had died unexpectedly and hadn't basically sorted out the inheritance. So awkward. So yeah, so he got this this position. This is one of the positions. Oh, thank you for the badge, Chrissy. Much appreciated. Yes, if anyone wants to support me with badges on Instagram, very much very grateful. Stars on Facebook or super chats on YouTube. You can also join my Patreon. I don't know if I mentioned it. That really helps me as well, and hopefully you. So he's actually made now I haven't looked into this, but he's made temporary regent for a month during James I's reign in 1617, and he's made Lord Chancellor in 1618. So he really does rise up during the reign of James I. But where is there to go? Actually, I haven't written this down, but I do know he's the only person in history to be a member of the House of Parliament and the House of Lords at the same time, which I'm pretty sure is not allowed now. Certainly a conflict of interest, because the way our system works, you know, a bill or an act is read out in Parliament, passed in Parliament, and then it goes for scrutiny to the House of Lords, so you can't sit on both. But his public career ended catastrophically in 1621. So Francis, he'd fallen into debt, but like I said, debt had dogged him throughout his life, and he was charged with 23 counts of corruption. Now, this is a time where you could technically say bribes were being given, donations were being given. They're given to political parties now. So let's, you know, this is something it's kind of a time immemorial thinking. Thank you very much, Patrick, for the badge. Really appreciate it. But if someone wants to make an issue of it, they can, and they did with Francis Bacon. He was sentenced to imprisonment in the Tower and fined, which I always think is bizarre if someone's in debt to fine them, but that's clearly they wanted to destroy him. And he was fined £40,000. This is in 1621. I don't know what the equivalent is, but £40,000 now would cripple somebody. So let's assume that was the reason. Now the king, though, he's still in favour with the king, and he gets him released, and he gets him the debt, the fine, wiped. But Parliament are successful in barring Bacon from holding any future office or sitting in Parliament. So he's been an MP for most of his life. He's had positions at Parliament, in the court for a long time, or in the law courts, and then in the royal court. And so he loses all of that. But he has a very interesting death. This is the other story that I said. I already realised I knew it, didn't match it to the same person. But before we go on to that, I just want to mention the scientific method, because he is seen as, now he wouldn't have called it the scientific method. I'm not quite sure what what he would have called it. They didn't really call it science. It was natural philosophy, I think it was at the time. The idea that let's not take sort of inherited truths for granted. Let's look at things, let's constantly scrutinize and try and disprove, I suppose, something that we take as a given. So this scientific method, it's constantly, if you speak to a scientist, you speak to somebody who deals in this kind of thing, you're always looking for the flaw in your theory. Because otherwise you're never completely getting to the truth. Because as soon as you start making assumptions, lots of other things come from it. So he's basically the father of that. He's also interested in the weather, by the way. He's one of the first people to say, well, here, I'm presuming other places in the world this happened, but can't we just look at the weather patterns, watch them, record them, and then try and predict the weather from them? So he's kind of the first weatherman, the first person to look at scientific method of analysis. So you might have heard from him for that reason, but clearly he's got this mind of interest, of intrigue, in looking at things, and so this is what leads to his death eventually in a very bizarre way. Which let's do this. It's fun. It's not fun because he dies, but it's if you're going to die. Anyway, let's get on to it. 1626, he's traveling to London and it's snowing. And goodness knows how, but he gets this idea that the cold could preserve meat. Now, at a time where you're salting, I don't know if any of you, if you're not of sort of British heritage, and I don't know about the continent, but we have a heritage of salting our food, salting our meat, because that was how we preserved it. So you find we have a lot. It's less now, but we used to be a lot of salt in our sort of traditional cooking. And it's because we used to. That's our method of preservation. Francis Bacon decides. It's a little bit ironic, the name, isn't it? Could the cold preserve meat? And so he has this idea. He gets the carriage that he's in to stop, and he buys a chicken off a local woman. She prepares it, guts it for him, and he stuffs it with snow. Good idea. He's 65 years old at this time. He's suddenly taken ill. And he ends up at his friend the Earl of Arundel's house, and he actually dies there on the 9th of April. So this is 1626. And he has no heirs, but anyway, so he says something about, so we don't know whether he died of pneumonia or a infection, perhaps from messing around with uncooked chicken. But he basically says to his friend in a final letter that he doesn't realize is going to be his final letter, that the experiment had worked very well. Now, if you think today we use the freezer to, yes, Marie, perhaps salmonella, we use freezing to preserve our food all the time now. Francis Bacon literally died doing that first experiment. Yes, Mayfair Forest Witch. Amazing that it took us this long to work it out. Yeah. Jenna says the American pioneers also used salt to preserve their meat, presumably because so maybe it's a European thing. And Maria, salmonella maybe. He was walking about with a raw chicken. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But anyway, I think he's fascinating. And I didn't want to do a full bio on him, but just maybe prick your interest so that you might go off and look a bit into him, because I think he's very, very interesting. So I don't know what else can we talk about today. We're actually nearly at the hour, so I will leave you in a moment. But let me do a quick recap. If you're we've covered Mary, Queen of Scots. It was her execution today. And if you want to look into her story, we're touring. We're actually doing the Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots story on tour in September. That's myself and Gareth. We're going from the 10th till the 15th of September. And we also still have spaces on the Private Life of Anne Boleyn tour, which goes on the 29th of June. There's honestly, the itineraries for them, I'm really, really proud of them. They're going to be fantastic. Just an aside, and I will do a post about this. My rebooking rate, because I'm incredibly proud of this, is 25%. So a quarter of the people coming this year came with me last year and have booked straight away to come back. I think that speaks volumes. But if you are interested in doing the May tour next year, because the May tour this year is fully booked, the Anne Boleyn tour, it's like the core tour that we do. Colleen, am I the only one finding bacon meat link amusing? No, I am definitely finding it amusing. Yes, if you want to, sorry, Colleen, if you want to do the Anne Boleyn tour in May, 2024 is about to go on sale to patrons next Wednesday. Become a member, patreon.com/British History, and you get 7 days to book before it goes on general release the following Wednesday. Join me tonight. I'm on History After Dark with the girls, Dr. Kat Marchant and Catherine Brooks. We're talking Elizabeth I. So this is our Deceased Git series, looking at people who actually either just assumed to be less than desirable people, or maybe in the case of Elizabeth I, there's some undesirability in there that you're not as aware of as you should be. So anyway, we're going to talk about Elizabeth I tonight. Genesis makes me wonder if anyone else died of salmonella poisoning, considering they did stretch the peacock's skin back over the bird. Yeah, well, you'd have thought there'd have been a lot about. They're not washing their hands, are they? After they're dealing with poultry. God, goodness knows. Don't know. We don't know. But yes, so join me next week, same time here. So Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, 1:00 next Wednesday. Or you can join me tonight along with Dr. Kat and Catherine Brooks for History After Dark, again on Instagram and YouTube. History.after.dark on Instagram, History After Dark on YouTube. And we're talking Elizabeth I. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. And I will see you all either tonight if you're around or next week. All right, see you soon.